Thanks to IRI. Thank you so much, IRI, for the raid. Holy crap. IRI. Everyone, shout out IRI, please. Raiders, welcome in. We want to shout out IRI. Really appreciate the raid. We stand IRI. We stand I'm Really Important. We stand it all. Thank you so much for the raid. We're about to get into some stuff, guys. So appreciate your support. Appreciate the raid. Hope you guys had a good stream and everything's good. I just had to come on screen right away if I don't want to waste the raid. Thank you so much. We'll be ready to go in a second. An unofficial YouTube raid, huh? We're gonna go in like 30 seconds, so just chill. Gotta get the links. Thank you for the follows. Can we have a day without talking about Trump? No. Peace with my boy. What up, everybody? Thank you so much again for the raid, IRI. My computer's a little laggy right now, so I'm gonna just close some stuff so that it's not as bad, because I don't really need this entire thing. Just one sec. I appreciate everyone. Hope you had a great Cinco de Mayo. Hope you really enjoyed the time spent with your family and friends. Of course, I'm just kidding. Happy Thanksgiving. We're gonna fix it. We're gonna fix it. All right, that should fix it a little bit. Maybe it's a little bit better. I appreciate y'all so much for the raid. IRI, once again, shout out. I'm Really Important on Twitch and YouTube. This guy, and on TikTok as well. Eventually, we're gonna be transitioning as well to the TikTok stuff. I have like 800 followers there, so we've grown from nothing. I didn't even have TikTok on my phone to now we have 800 followers. We are following in the light of IRI and his IRI TikTok debates. So if you have access to that platform, feel free to give me a follow. And everyone who was here in the waiting before the raid, just go ahead and follow IRI if you haven't already. I'm sure you have. Okay, folks, a lot to talk about in the aftermath. We're finally back in the city, back in the usual setup for now. And stuff's going on, you know? So it's important to talk about it, including further confirmation of a growing and disturbing pattern of murder that's occurring on our behalf, on your dime, and in your name. But welcome, everyone. Any thoughts before we get started? You did a Greek Thanksgiving at the farm. You're still full. Ooh. Did you have lamb? You based IRI for banning annoying love. You guys need to you just need to chill. I hope we're talking about Trump declaring bankruptcy like Michael Scott. No, we're not declaring that. We're going to be talking about the aftermath of the murder of the National Guard member and the attempted murder of the other one. He's, as far as I know, still alive. And we're also going to be talking about the murder on the high seas and the lies and the grifters and the fraudsters who are running cover for the administration. That's what our game plan is. Regular dude has thoughts. Stuff is happening, says Substance. Based, said Valerie. Thank you for the sub, Savage Brute. Really appreciate it. But why don't we start by saying let's deal with the National Guard thing first, because this is important stuff to understand the chaotic and cruel way in which the Trump administration is dealing with immigration policy, but also how they deal with scandal. So let's talk about it. There was a promise that American citizens were given when Trump decided to go all out on his quote-unquote mass deportation strategy, right? An inherent bargain. And that bargain was as follows. Well, first let's talk about the premise of that bargain. The premise of the bargain is the reason that you guys are facing what you're facing, economic insecurity, rising prices, crime at any given level. Thank you for the memberships, guys. Really appreciate the memberships. Really appreciate the support. The reason that you're, insert problem here is because of immigrants, both illegal and legal immigrants. That is the underlying premise. And the bargain on offer by the Trump campaign and now the second Trump administration was, we will alleviate these problems by implementing what on the face of it appears cruel, on the face of it appears needlessly vindictive and angry. It's all part of an overall harm reduction strategy to alleviate that which ails the American people. And though on the surface, it might seem casually cruel, it's done to fix the problems for the native citizens of this land. And so part of the method is to put on a strong face and deter that which ails us. That's the bargain. That's the premise. So you give me the room, the wiggle room to be cruel, the wiggle room sometimes perhaps to do illegal things, as you'll often see a lot of these sycophants and, what do you want to say, instruments of propaganda of the regime. What they'll say is that, we'll give you latitude. We don't care if it's illegal to deport these people, or if he's doing it in an illegal fashion, or in a fashion that is needless, or if there are a couple of broken eggs. We're going to give a lot of latitude on the law, on any particular instance of potential rights violations, and certainly in terms of cruelty. That fundamentally, the government is instituted and constituted to serve the American citizenry. That's what was promised. There are problems with the bargain initially, which is all of the country's woes don't relate to immigration, legal or illegal. This is a lie. This is a lie that's been told from time immemorial by elites to fester xenophobia and anger, and to shift blame from elites, from powerful people where the responsibility does lie, onto the consciousness of illegal and legal immigrants, immigrants generally, on others. This is not something new. This is as old as dirt. So that's one problem, is solving, quote unquote, the immigration crisis won't do what they promise it will. That even if you could, quote unquote, fix the immigration problem, it wouldn't cause prices to go down. It wouldn't make all of the economic insecurity issues go away. It wouldn't improve materially your lives. And this was obvious to all of us arguing it in the lead up to the 2024 election. Trump is a demagogue. Trump is a demagogue, and his solutions are bullshit. It's not just on immigration, by the way. Look no further than healthcare, where you never, right, got a plan from Trump on healthcare, ever. They just said, we're going to make it great, we're going to make it good. And to the extent that there are issues, it's all the illegal immigrants' faults, because they're the ones using up resources, going to the emergency rooms. The states are illegally sequestering funds to give them to illegals. That's also their argument for defunding Medicaid, which disproportionately hurt Republican working class people in Republican states. Not yet. It will when they kick in cynically after Trump is no longer in office. That was also the rationale given for the shutdown fight, which some Democrats abandoned. Namely that the Democrats are trying to prolong this shutdown because of their desire to give health care to illegal immigrants. That was their argument. On anything, on housing, J.D. Vance said preposterously that the reason why we're facing a housing shortage is because, don't you know, all of these poor illegal immigrants, they're buying up all the homes. It's almost like self-evidently absurd, that response. On prices, what is there to say? Prices have gone up. We have not seen results from this. They've gone up. Why have they gone up? Well, combine the absurd tariffs that are taxes. They're taxes that fall disproportionately on the poorest working class American. They're taxes that are paid by importers that are passed on to consumers. Those are taxes. Combine them with the chaotic way in which they're signaling enforcement of immigration, where, okay, we're not going after farmers, we're not going after construction, like all of these different exceptions where they say that they're catering to the business class, the interest, all that stuff, right? They're catering to prices, and then they double back on it, and then you look at the actual stats, and overwhelmingly the people that they're capturing, that they're arresting under immigration authorities to detain, these are people who don't have violent criminal convictions or criminal convictions at all. They're neighbors, they're going into places where it's easy to find people who did it the right way, possibly, in that they put themselves down in the system, declared who they are in immigration proceedings, or are trying to adjust their status legally. There are individuals who are going to their green card interviews and they're being picked up before they can do them and complete them. And so they're coordinating within the branches to apprehend people going to courthouses for all sorts of different matters and going to their adjustment of status interviews. That is to become a lawful permanent resident in this country. And what is the effect of that? Well, now you have scared and caused less employment in the areas of highest concern for prices. What are the main inputs in agriculture and construction production? Would be labor, wouldn't it? Would be having people to do the jobs. How are you going to produce more supply of food, more supply of housing, more supply of the things that everyone says they want more supply in to drive prices down, if you're increasing taxes on those inputs and increasing the cost of labor? Right? So this bargain never made any sense. That's why all the economic forecasters that everyone discredited, and to be honest, you find any kind of proposal, you'll find one economist who says that it's good or whatever. But the overwhelming sentiment of investment banks, Goldman Sachs, independent economic academics is this is not going to help prices. Trump's plan sucks. Lo and behold, the results are shitty. They speak for themselves. The American people are not convinced in the slightest. Look at his numbers when it comes to prices and inflation and the economy. This used to be a strength for Trump in his first term and in the election. It is his weakest area of major significance, barring, of course, the Epstein files where he's underwater by 40 points. The American people are not buying it, but they don't have a single alternative than to double down, triple down, quadruple down on more enforcement of immigration law. Or I shouldn't say that, right? Because in some respect, they're enforcing immigration law, but in other respects, they're distorting, deleting, supplanting, and ignoring immigration law, right? They're ignoring all the constraints on the government when it comes to the Immigration Nationality Act, right? You have to think of a set of laws that give discretion, but they also give constraints. You have some power, but not all. You give this amount of power, but not the fullest amount. We spent all this time worrying, right, in Congress to set out and carve out these various different systems. In the immigration context, it's perhaps the most complicated form of government benefit processes and penalties and punishments that we have, more complicated than the tax code, some have argued. And that has been developed over the course of decades in adjustments to the legislation by various different presidents, including Clinton, including Bush. We reorganized how immigration enforcement is done. We've given more money to immigration enforcement, and obviously through decisions, case law. All of this is an expression of democratic will. When someone tells you should ignore the law, what they're showing themselves to be are authoritarians who don't care about the will of the American people, right? The will of the American people is ensconced in the laws we pass, at least from a federal perspective, in Congress, backed by the ultimate democratic input, which is the Constitution. So to the extent that someone would argue to you, hey, who cares about this statute in place limiting presidential authority? You need to question, well, what is being proposed here? What's being proposed here is to ignore the will of the American people, as demonstrated by the decision of their representatives to pass certain laws, limiting enforcement abilities in one sense, granting them in some sense. Anyways, the administration has taken every power that they have and every power that they claim to have to try to shift the narrative onto immigration. Every single issue where they feel they're the strongest. They're wrong about that in terms of polling. The American people are not buying it. I told you they weren't buying it on the economy. They're also not buying it when it comes to immigration. The numbers have fallen precipitously for Trump because they don't agree. They don't agree with what he's doing. It's not helping. And the American people are starting to see that. And it's showing in his numbers. They suck on an issue that was one of his top issues. Enter the shooting of the National Guard members in D.C. Full facts aren't known right now. We have enough to make out some analysis, though. First thing to note is already the shifting narratives from MAGA propagandists. I had a sort of an emergency stream after some updates in what occurred. This was on Wednesday, where I talked about the shifting narratives. At first it was, when they didn't know who this person was, they were inspired by Mark Kelly and Alyssa Slotkin's hint, hint signals, nudge, nudge. When Alyssa Slotkin and Mark Kelly said, make sure you have an obligation not to follow illegal orders if they're manifestly illegal, and you shouldn't follow illegal orders. This is a true and accurate factual statement. And the narrative from MAGA, can you believe this narrative? It is so preposterous as to be, like I mentioned, self-discrediting. Their whole argument was some Antifa super soldier was inspired by Alyssa Slotkin and Mark Kelly, centrist Democrats. When they said, make sure not to follow legal orders, they were inspired. That was a calculated incitement. And also intended by Mark Kelly. That's what incitement is. Incitement requires intention. That Kelly and Slotkin intended some Antifa super soldier, some resistance lib wine mom, to go and kill National Guard members. It doesn't even make sense. There's not even a plausible case that it's in the self-interest of Democrats to have these people slaughtered on the streets, bushwhacked by a crazy person. What, so they can claim more authorities? Especially after Democrats have been successful in recent weeks in some of the National Guard litigation, including specifically in D.C., where they had just won at the trial court level. So it's a preposterous set of conspiracy theories with no evidence. It could have turned out, though implausible it seemed, that something approaching that happened, right? That it could turn out that this guy, it is logically possible that that occurred. It is not something that it entails itself a contradiction. The problem is, though, there's no evidence, and your intuition behind it should already be ringing alarm bells. Of course, these scum would say this. Thank you so much for the sub. They say it about every tragedy that occurs. They try to put the blame on Democrats. And the biggest irony, of course, was this came after Trump was literally calling for the enforcement of sedition laws against these individuals, ignoring the clear legal meaning of seditious conspiracy in the U.S. law, as well as the lack of any basis for anything criminal whatsoever, ignoring the First Amendment protects that speech, ignoring that what was said is accurate and true, and not at all a call for incitement in any respect. That Trump was calling for the enforcement of those laws and the death by hanging of these Democratic members. And the MAGA propagandist class, thank you so much for the super chat. Super chat asks, what do you think the approval rating floor is for Donnie if the current trend continues 25-30? I think it's something in like 34 or 35%, something like that. I think that's the floor. And the MAGA propagandist class wanted you to believe that, oh, what Alyssa Slotkin and Mark Kelly did when they put a video out was incite violence against their enemies. That was what that was. But when Trump says what he said about those Democrats, what he labeled the seditious six, that is not incitement. And remember, incitement is not something that is defined by the actual results of something, right? That's not what incitement is. Incitement is, you incite at the moment you do the inciting incident, okay? That's when you incite. It was a preposterous notion to imply culpability as to Democrats in any respect. And then the fallback argument, once they realized no one was buying that, no one in their right mind could make a case that Mark Kelly and Alyssa Slotkin inspired this violence, especially with zero evidence. They said the same old routine they're always saying. Oh, because you called them fascist. And then we've debunked that numerous times. We've told you why that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. We've told you how it's not a standard that's applied evenly, that no one will acknowledge that when Trump said Kamala was a fascist, what he really meant was an incitement to murder. No one considers it that way. No one would say when Tim Pool called Democrats fascist multiple times over the course of his career, and all these other guys, if you do a search of fascist plus Jack Posobiec, fascist plus Tim Pool, fascist plus any one of these scum, you will find instances of them calling their political enemies fascist. None of them consider that to be a call to violence. None of them. Not a single one of them. Of course they wouldn't. It's them. They don't have any standard to uphold because they're government bootlicking shills. They are government bootlicking shills that want to destroy this country and that want to throw all their political enemies in prison, to say nothing of what they understand the term communist to be. They consider communists to be, quote, unhumans. That's Jack Posobiec's book. He thinks they're unhumans. He thinks that communists should be killed. This is all known. And so when they call everyone, every Democrat and their gerbil, a communist, as they have for decades and decades and decades, including centrists like Hillary Clinton, including Barack Obama, you don't even need me to pull up all the instances. The narrative falls apart. It is a pack of lies for stupid people to believe. And no one is buying it anymore. And their cries are more and more looking desperate, anguished, trying to cling to some narrative, some through line in their failing movement, which is now unable to achieve what it promised to do for the American people. The only thing that they have left is hate and going after immigrants. So it later turns out that we have an Afghan national who did this murder, who did this crime. Instantly, that's the first fact that comes out. We don't yet know the circumstances of what happened. He's an Afghan national. And so people say, illegal immigrant, illegal immigrant. Then we find out, oh, he was legally paroled into the country. So not an illegal. Okay. Biden era, right? Biden era. Biden brought him in. So it's Biden's responsibility. The blame is on the Bidens. It was the open border policy of the Bidens. Then it turns out Trump was presiding over the administration. It was the Trump administration that granted asylum to this person. And you have to love this, right? There's one thing to say, oh, he was brought into the country under Biden. Maybe because, as later turned out, this guy worked for the CIA. He helped the CIA. He helped the government. This is no different, by the way, like what you would expect a Republican administration to do. Any decent administration would have considered, hey, when we're leaving Afghanistan and we have had contracts and deals and worked with locals here who are at risk now, that we ought to consider them for all different kinds of processes. Right? These people put their trust and faith in the United States. It is not just for their own benefit that we consider them to protect them. You don't even need to make the argument. It makes itself. If America abandons the people who put their trust in America for operations, sensitive operations in enemy territory, if it does that, what signal does that send in the future? When we ask for help again in these regions, they'll know America is not good for its word, that you can't trust Washington. You can't trust the CIA to follow through on its word. So, of course, not only does it make ethical, moral sense to help out the group of people who are helping us in this war that we declared, where we invaded another country in response to an attack on our homeland. Not only does it, of course, make sense from an ethical perspective, but also from a geostrategic perspective, from an international perspective. In the long term, don't make our name mud. But even if you didn't buy that, and if you say, oh, we should have just abandoned them to the Taliban, right? If that's your view, then why did Trump grant these people asylum? This guy specifically, why did the administration grant him asylum? People will say, oh, he couldn't have done anything. I had this whole thing. Maybe I'll show you the exchange. They're desperate for something. They're desperate for some hook. Let me show you this exchange. It's actually insane. So, first, desperately, they'll reply and try to find anything to say Trump couldn't have done anything. It was these lib judges. They forced Trump's hand. He had to grant them asylum. And understand what asylum is. Asylum is a path to a green card, all right? When you grant asylum to an individual, you are granting them a pathway to a green card. The only thing they have to do is just wait for a green card to become available under the different caps that we have. We have country caps and we have an overall cap on asylum green cards every year. But you are granted asylum, and as long as you wait, you will get a green card. That's what asylum does, okay? Separate in your mind asylum from removal. They're obviously different. One thing is to remove someone or to detain someone or to try to remove someone and grant asylum. One is a discretionary. I have to stress, asylum is discretionary. There are factors that make you eligible for asylum, and then there are factors that make you ineligible from asylum. So you can meet the eligibility criteria. You cannot meet the ineligibility criteria. So, for example, you are ineligible if you commit an aggravated felony. You're ineligible to become an asylee, okay? You are ineligible to become an asylee if you wait for more than a year, subject to certain exceptions, to apply for asylum. That's why Kilmar Abrego Garcia could not get his asylum. Why could he not get his asylum? Because he was ineligible under one of the ineligibility criteria. But it's not enough to be eligible under the eligibility criteria and not ineligible under the ineligibility criteria. You also need a favorable exercise of discretion. It is a discretionary benefit to the petitioner. In no respect is it required for any particular individual for the administration to grant asylum. And they are desperate. And these asylum processes contain within them security checks. You go get your fingerprints done. You go through background checks. You go and get assessed as a security risk. Those are obviously entailed in the asylum process. They're a part of the process. And so when the administration grants an individual asylum, they have gone through those checks. And the administration has determined them to be eligible and deserving of a positive exercise of discretion. That's what asylum contains within it. So that's why it's so embarrassing and destroys the narrative that the MAGA government shill class try to do, which is, this is all Biden open borders shit. That's what they try to say. It destroys the narrative if the Trump administration is giving an exercise of favorable discretion on an asylum claim in which security checks are entailed. Desperate, right? Desperate to find some way out, to show somehow that Trump's hands were tied. That's what they're trying to show. Find me a way to say, oh, he had to grant asylum. They're not going to find anything. They're not going to find jack shit. They're not. But they reach out nonetheless. And you can imagine if this were the other way. Can you imagine if this guy had come in like 2020, right? Under Trump. But Biden had granted asylum. His administration had granted asylum in that window. And just, of course, all of you who are thinking Homo sapiens, keep in the back of your mind, this entire analysis is absurd. We are playing in the framework of the MAGA propagandists. That's why it's so much fun and to find them squirming. So, but the assumption is that the president is signing off on this shit. That is, of course, ridiculous. The notion that Biden or Trump would like individually sign off on these things. And that this wouldn't be a textbook case of asylum in any administration. So we're just playing in this absurd framework where the president is responsible for everything that his underlings do, right? That is the framework of the MAGA propaganda shills that they use to lie to the American people. But within that framework, imagine if it were the other way around, where the guy came in, was paroled in by the Trump administration, and was granted asylum by the Biden administration. Which of the critical moments do you think the Trump propagandist shills would be talking about in that context? They would say, well, it didn't matter that they brought him in. It was Biden who authorized the asylum, right? So their perspective on which of these is the like most important moment is totally premised on political convenience. It has nothing to do with some kind of like merits-based analysis of which is the more culpable party with respect to this individual. And let me break it down from an even more basic level. Shit happens. You don't like to hear this, but sometimes there is no explanation or there is no other party at fault for a thing. Sometimes crazy, fucked up people exist or someone goes insane. You don't need actually to be having to blame individuals in your political sort of target for every bad thing that occurs in the United States. It could be the case that the Trump administration exercised perfect amounts of due diligence in approving this guy's asylum petition. That could totally be the case. And notwithstanding that fact, the guy just lost it or something pissed him off. Or even though he had no record of this, he went and did it. Or perhaps they didn't have access to the information that would have made that apparent. And all they had access to was the sort of the good information for this person. That's at like a base level is everyone wants to assume that there's someone to blame because they don't want to live in a world or a society in which bad things happen to good people for no reason. Well, I'm sorry, you live in that world. It's called reality. I know that you might think that like you have to explain your God and the problem of evil, which it's right. The only way they can explain the evil that occurs in this world is through free will, conscious will. Otherwise, how do you explain babies being killed in massive floods? How do you explain 10-year-olds getting cancer and dying in pain and agony? And so they can't make sense of this seeming capriciousness of the universe. And so they have to lie to themselves or lie to the rest of the country for their own benefit, for clout, for money, or for political favor. That's at the bottom of all of this. And so do I think that the Trump administration deserves culpability for granting this guy's asylum petition if they had no problem with due diligence, if they did everything that could be reasonably expected of a government? No, of course not. We're playing in their framework. It's an internal critique. So I don't want you to lose sight of, we're doing this as a show of how preposterous their premises and the structure of their argument is. But the truth is, we just don't know what the hell's going on with this person. There needs to be an investigation, and it could be that no reasonable effort taken would have prevented this kind of thing. That could very well be the case. So don't lose sight of that when I'm talking about this, like Trump administration is responsible. It is from the framework of these liars who try to pretend to have a consistent standard across governments and using this standard against the propagandist shills. Desperate to find some hook to blame Democrats. People who run these accounts who are, I have to stress, it's not just a corruption issue among these propagandists. It is a raw IQ issue. They are not smart enough to do the stuff they're talking about. This applies to Benny Johnson. This applies to Tim Pool. This applies to Jack Posobiec. This applies to Donald Trump Jr. This applies to J.D. Vance. They are not smart enough. He reaches and says, a random advocacy group applauds a court decision to block Trump's administration's suspension of the U.S. refugee resettlement program. Look at this. Look at this. The guy wasn't brought in under the refugee resettlement program, right? Wasn't brought in under the refugee resettlement program. But he pulls it up because he sees the word refugee and it's like toddler word association. They're like, oh my God, I need to find something. So they find some random advocacy group that celebrates the temporary pause of a completely different program, not at issue in this case whatsoever. This guy wasn't brought by the refugee resettlement program. He was paroled into the country and then applied for asylum. That is not the refugee resettlement program. But they're not smart enough. They're liars. And look at it. Look at this response. Look at this response. The point is that Trump obviously opposes this type of migration. Not that this case is exact. So to use an approval to pretend as if the Trump administration is responsible for this guy being in the country is stupid. You shit libs salivate and defend these people at every opportunity. So try to think of what he's saying. He's saying the Trump administration opposes the kind of asylum cases that it approves. Right? This shows, right, the fact that a different program, not at issue, where they closed off some refugees under a separate program, that shows that Trump doesn't want this type of refugee. Asylum is hooked onto the definition of refugee. That's why you can still call it a refugee case in some sense, but it's not part of the refugee resettlement program. That's just some technical description. So the refugees that he excludes on a different program, those ones he doesn't want. And it shows how the refugees that he accepts, he doesn't want those either. Huh? Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It makes no sense whatsoever. It'd be like, yeah, these are the kinds of cases that Trump doesn't like. That's why he approved them. Huh? So he disapproved other cases and he approved this one, and that shows that he disapproves this one. I am telling you, these people have no frontal lobe in their brain. They are bots. They can't think. Moving on, other responses. Look at this person who has, cordial in DMs before this person, but it just pisses me off. Look at what she says. She entered under Biden's Operation Allies Welcome on temporary humanitarian parole. He applied for asylum before Trump took office. In April, Trump ended TPS, but it was reversed by the court. At the same time, USCIS granted him asylum, which gave him strong near permanent protection from deportation. Once asylum is granted, only a lengthy legal process can revoke it. Even after Trump tried to end TPS and revoked many Afghan paroles, he could not be deported before the shooting. This is the most preposterous set of statements to try to deflect and the most ineffective perhaps I've ever seen on this issue. So TPS, temporary protective status, has nothing to do with asylum. Okay? Let me repeat that 3 more times. TPS has nothing to do with asylum. TPS has nothing to do with asylum. TPS has nothing to do with asylum. TPS is a temporary protected status that prevents certain classes of people being deported to certain places. You get me? It is temporary, and the president can revoke TPS under certain circumstances, right? Make sure you follow the procedures for the revocation. But TPS doesn't have to do with asylum. Asylum is permanent. What is asylum? Asylum is a determination as to an individual. Now, part of that is incorporated a country analysis to actually make sure. Like, you couldn't just lie about why you would face persecution in the country. Obviously, the base facts of TPS might inform like a country condition analysis for an asylum petition, but they're individualized determinations for a permanent situation, right? And nothing is forcing the administration to, on a discretionary basis, grant asylum to someone who is also potentially protected by TPS. There is no inconsistency there whatsoever. And more to the point, they didn't even try to remove this person. And you might think like, well, why? Well, it's because they almost certainly didn't see him as a threat. There's probably no good basis to think that this person was going to be a threat that was reasonable for the administration to comprehend at the time. But again, accepting the framework of the propaganda scum, government bootlicking shills, they would say there has to be some treachery at foot. And so what they say is they're trying to blame some activist judge and say, they suspended TPS and therefore what? Therefore, how does that justify on your framework Trump granting asylum after going through a security check and giving this guy a pathway to citizenship? Furthermore, it doesn't make any sense at all. It doesn't make any sense. Why? The TPS doesn't stop them from detaining this person. Doesn't stop them from arresting this person. Doesn't stop them from trying to remove them. Certainly, the Trump administration has tried to remove people for which there are like situations like this, right? Where there's legal bars, potential legal bars to removal. They have tried to remove people notwithstanding those bars, to challenge them. And it is so unconvincing. Look at what she tries to do here. USCIS granted him asylum as though to remove Trump from it. Do these guys ever give the benefit of the doubt that way to Biden and say, oh, it wasn't Biden, it was Biden's DHS. Oh, it wasn't Biden, it was Biden's DOJ. Do they ever make that kind of delineation? USCIS is one of the immigration enforcement agencies, immigration agencies in general, under Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security. So what is being muddled in this word salad irrelevant on TPS, nothing to do with asylum. What is being muddled there is, oh yeah, Trump crazy people, Trump frothing at the mouth locos are in all these positions, including at the head of USCIS and including at the head of DHS, who oversees USCIS, Kristi Noem. They're all sicko thugs. They're all Trump loyalists. Notwithstanding that fact, right? And so she said, USCIS granted it. The dude wasn't in removal proceedings. So this wasn't as, there's another dude who we talked about in the previous stream on Wednesday. Fuck, I don't even remember his name. This is a loser, starts with a C. What is this dude's name? Who was lying about Democrats? My mind keeps going to Caleb Maupin, but I don't even know who that is. Cam Higbee. That was it. Cam Higbee. Well, I'll show you this part too. I'll show it. But why don't I just do it right now? Fuck it. We'll get back to this. Cam Higbee says the president doesn't approve asylum cases. The judiciary does. The same judiciary that's been actively working against the president since he took office. These are the basic stop lines. So he's trying to fact check Harry's system, but Harry, of course, is correct. Harry, of course, is totally correct. You are so fucking stupid. First, IJs, immigration judges, are not part of the judiciary. They are part of the Executive Office for Immigration Review under the Department of Justice under Trump. Second, no evidence the shooter who was paroled into the USA was ever in removal proceedings. He probably applied affirmatively with the DHS with USCIS. And that's exactly how that shit went down. That is exactly how that shit went down. He applied through USCIS. And so this delusional fucking propagandist who spent 14 minutes crying crocodile tears, spreading misinformation, as soon as he could, raced out of his family gathering to do a little disgusting performance with his cat, is spreading rank information and misunderstanding basic elements of immigration enforcement. The guy's clueless. He says, IJs are part of the judiciary. No, they're not. No, they're not. The judiciary is the judicial branch of the United States. These are executive officers. The judges are not like true judicial branch judges. They're executive officers under the Attorney General. The Attorney General is the head of the immigration judges. The Attorney General releases opinions that are binding on immigration judges. Do you understand? So everything about this is wrong, including the fact that the dude wasn't in removal proceedings. Wasn't in removal proceedings at all. And that gets us back to this little response where I'm talking to this person. They were never in removal proceedings. And so all of this goes away. It doesn't have anything to do with it, right? It's just word salad, right? Desperate. Oh, you see refugee? Oh, okay. Well, TPS, and they stopped him for TPS. Therefore, they affirmatively prevented him from not granting asylum. That's fucking stupid. That's loco. That don't make any sense. And then she's trying to say, are you saying those who came under Biden's Operation Allies Welcome on temporary humanitarian parole did not have TPS status? And then were not fast-tracked to asylum under Biden? So they also can't read. Do any of you see this here? Where I say that they're not granted TPS? Where they didn't? And this, I believe it was congressional, say that there had to be consideration of, basically they put them at the front of the line is what happened. There's a huge backlog of asylum cases. So if you want asylum in this country, there is an enormous backlog. And so what did they do? They brought them in quickly and they put them at the front of the line. That's what happened. Does any part of my statement say they didn't do that or even imply it in any way? No. They can't read. It's that meme about, oh, you said you like, what's the meme? You like pancakes, therefore you hate waffles? That's a whole different thing. It's not at all implied in what I'm saying. 2 IQ, 1 IQ, inability to have like basic reading comprehension. They're struggling. They're struggling to read words. And they just run with random shit that any thinking sane person looks at this and says, at no point did he say or deny anything we were saying. It wasn't addressed. And I said, I didn't say that. I said that the decision to grant asylum had nothing to do with decisions on TPS. They're just not related. They are not related, and nothing. And she will then say, the Biden administration fast-tracked asylums. Trump tried to reverse TPS. But again, the TPS doesn't have anything to do except factually about why, the fact is Afghanistan was falling. That is the only relation to these things. But as a legal, what she's trying to imply, in other words, is Trump's hands were tied. Trump couldn't have done otherwise. That's very clearly what she's trying to imply. Everyone knows it. She's trying to fact check this Occupy Democrats account by giving some additional context to mitigate what Trump did in their eyes. Remember, using their framework. And that's so obviously what she's doing, but it has nothing to do, right? TPS, nothing to do with the asylum situation. It's true USCIS granted his asylum in the application of the Trump administration, but the process started under Biden. Can you imagine, right? And by process started under Biden, all she means is the guy submitted his application in December of 2024. That's what she means by the process started in December 2024. Could you imagine if Trump, if the process had started in that the guy applied for asylum in the last month of the Trump administration in 2020, in December of 2020, and then Biden granted it during his administration, that any Republican Trump person would say, yes, Biden authorized it, but the process started under Trump. He submitted his application under Trump. Therefore, Trump is responsible because he submitted it. This guy submitted it under Trump. Not who approved it. It's when the process started. Not the actual security check and then the stamp of approval. It was when you sent the application. And then they send back a receipt notice. They didn't read it, okay? They didn't read it in the month he had left. They approved it in April. These things, they come and they take a look at it. That most of it is the backlog is what you're waiting for. Again, stupid, silly, not at all dealing with reality. And then look at her crying. I'm not desperate. You could have just had a conversation. I'm just saying it's more nuanced. That's not what she was doing. Your TPS and fast track garbage is obviously an attempt to pretend that Trump admin's hands were tied. Don't try to deny that. Their hands were not tied. This was discretionary relief after a security check, and conservatives are molding because it doesn't fit their propaganda. That is reality. And there is no one willing to debate that point from the conservative right, which supports MAGA, because it is fundamentally true. Fundamentally true. And don't let them gaslight you ever. This is what I mean by don't give them an inch. Continue to ridicule them. Continue to debunk their bullshit because they're trying to pull a fast one here. They know that Trump is losing approval rating. They know that he is a lame duck and that he sucks. And this administration is full of garbage men at the top running everything who don't know what the fuck they're doing. And look at where we are. It went from, and they're trying to maintain both narratives because I see the propagandists still saying, oh, it's Islamic terrorism, but it's also Mark Kelly and Alyssa Slotkin encouraging this Islamic terrorist, which, by the way, we don't know yet. It could well be that this individual had some other motive, was crazy, whatever you want to say. The full facts are not in, but they're trying to maintain that it was both that Alyssa Slotkin and Mark Kelly inspired. Mark Kelly, by the way, whose wife was a victim of a shooting, a crazed lunatic shooting in Arizona. That's Gabby Giffords. They are trying to claim that Mark Kelly and Alyssa Slotkin inspired Islamic jihadists by stating that the military has the right to disobey illegal orders. It is so stupid. It is such a transparent lie. It insults your intelligence It is not worthy of an American. It is not worthy of a sentient creature. And they're trying to maintain both, the bastards. They're trying to say it's both. That Islam has declared a war against the West, and Mark Kelly is in on this Islamic conspiracy by triggering it and wanting it to come about. That's why Tim Pool quote tweets me and says, Pisco's on the side of the shooter before we even know who the shooter is, just because I'm calling out the lies in real time of these MAGA bootlicking shills. Their shame knows no bounds. Their shame knows no bounds. And you really need to be angry at these propagandist shills. These elite MAGA propagandists, you need to hate them. You do. I'm sorry. These people are attacking your country. They are your enemy. I don't want you to do anything violent to these people whatsoever. Words, votes. But you need to know that they're the enemy. I believe in redemption for people. Could they change their ways? Sure. But right now, you need to hate them. You need to despise them. It is a cancer, a blight on our society. Will I engage with them in debate? 100%. But they think that you're a worm, right? They don't care about lying about you. They don't care about lying about their enemies. They don't care about any of that stuff. And we're above them because say what you want about us. I'm not going to encourage actively lying on them. I never do that. I never will try to intentionally have deceptions about these commentators. They don't care though. And so as long as that's the case, as long as there are no standards, you need to know that they are the enemy. And don't at all confuse it. When I'm on these, appearing in these different spaces, when I'm having these conversations, it is an info war and we are trying to win. We are trying to win. You cannot trust them. You cannot be charmed by them. In a second, we'll talk about Drew Pavlo. If you let yourself be charmed, you're no good to us. You always have to have your critical faculties running 100%. Don't let yourself be charmed by Richard Spencer or Nick Fuentes. Don't be like Cenk Uygur, who sometimes is based, but he gets charmed by Marjorie Taylor Greene. I saw him on Hassan's channel. It was insane. Because they do the Thanksgiving. It's actually sometimes funny. But in that moment, Hassan was the voice of reason. Cenk was saying, I want to gather together with Tucker. Because why? Cenk and Anna Kasparian are charmed by Tucker. And it's Hassan Piker who's having to talk him down and say, this is crazy. If you let yourself be charmed by these idiots, by Marjorie Taylor Greene, or by Tucker Carlson or Nick Fuentes, or God forbid, Ben Shapiro, you're no good to us. You really need to keep your fucking wits about you. I'm arriving at a point. Been a lot of build up to it. Well, let me, before we get to the strikes, because that's related to Drew Pavlo. The administration has a response, and you know what the administration says? Oh, well, because an asylee from Afghanistan that we approved, and we checked, and we fingerprinted him, because he killed a service member, now all of you will suffer. That's what Trump says. All of you immigrants will suffer. You will all be blamed for this action. We are suspending all asylum, he says. He says, we are not letting in anyone from a third world country. So there's collective guilt on all Afghanistan nationals, not just them, on all nationals from Cuba. Collective guilt. What's the relation between Cuba and Afghanistan? They're a third world country, says Trump. And so the Cubans trying to escape a communist regime in Cuba, they are going to be blamed for the actions of this Afghan national. You tell me, what sense does that make? Is it not a transparent attempt to try to pass the buck on a security decision that I started this entire conversation promising you or telling you about the promise of MAGA, which is this shit won't happen anymore. That's what they said. That was the bargain that was made when these people voted for Trump. This shit won't happen. But here's the problem. When you give up your rights, when you give up the institutional guardrails, when you give up liberty, when you give up due process, you get neither security nor your rights. They can't protect you. Even with all this stuff going on, all the cruelty, all the bullshit that they're in courts wasting millions of your dollars in litigation, in capturing people who are not threats to their neighbors, in doing all of this show, in trying to do the propaganda and all the videos and all the bullshit AI slop that they've done. They can't protect you. And so everyone who buys this bargain that I'll give over the basis of my liberty as currently enacted in exchange for this security by these incompetent, stupid, evil people, you're a sucker because you're not going to get it. And so once that becomes so obvious that, yeah, shit happens and these guys, these geniuses aren't going to prevent bad things from happening. If anything, right? They're the ones deploying these guys on a mission that the decedent, this woman who died and was murdered, said was useless, a useless mission. Right? If anything, if we're gonna talk about just causality here, if we're gonna start saying, oh, you're responsible if you received an asylum petition, then talk to me about who's responsible in terms of why those troops were there. If that's your framework. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's your framework. When you start saying Biden's responsible because he received a petition in December on the way out, then who's responsible for putting the soldiers there? Just saying. So the bargain won't ever be honored because they, A, care about other things more. They care about corruption. They care about enriching themselves. They care about their ballroom where they have all these different investors, all the elites from the country and from other countries. You want to talk about a war with Islam? This guy is bringing in, if this is what you care about, if it's a battle for the soul of the United States against, clash of civilizations against Islam, Trump is inviting the royal families of Qatar, of Saud, all of these Muslim societies. He has the new president of Syria, former affiliate of ISIS. And on their lights, right, they think Mamdani is a jihadist. That's what they called him. They invite Mamdani in, and he says he's going to be a great mayor. It's not the only point of hypocrisy that you'll find. We'll get to the strikes where they're talking about, oh, we really need to get out the drug traffickers. Dude's coming out pardoning one of the worst drug traffickers in history. Just today. On the day that they're all arguing about drug traffickers being needed to, you need to assassinate them against the laws of the United States and international law, they're pardoning them. They don't give a fuck. What they care about is lining their pockets, making Trump have his ego be inflated with gifts, with emoluments, with relics, with deals. And so they don't give a shit about your security. They will only use these incidents to further deprive you of your liberties and your economic futures. And keep blaming immigrants because they know that there's a percentage of their base that is stupid or fearful or misinformed enough to believe them. And instead of blaming all the elites that are raking in billions, you watch every time there's a new tariff announcement, there's massive trades right before the announcement. You think they aren't raking in billions on the government powers? And they have poor working class people being led by these MAGA propagandist government bootlicking shills, these liars, professional liars, fighting with other poor people who didn't even do the crime. bargain will never be kept. They won't keep their words. They're incapable of it. They only understand power and money. And lies. They understand that. So the response by Trump is, hey, let's blame all current asylees. Asylum processing is paused. So says Trump. Well, if you want to do that, why didn't you do it before? At a bare minimum, everyone who is buying this line from the administration has to acknowledge Trump was being pushed around by lefties, was naive, had something in his arsenal that he didn't use because it was stupid and didn't have enough foresight. Even if you buy this ridiculous line, it's Trump's fault. And he's going to blame asylees from an arbitrary set of countries that have no particular relation to each other than they're easy targets by the administration, even though they undermine the stories of some of the most important members of the administration. Marco Rubio, Cuban American. But we're going to fight them all the way. And do not mistake their outlandish reactions and their cruelty for strength. It's the opposite. It's weakness. Do not let your foot off the pedal. 1%. Peaceful, patriotic. Additionally, they're calling into question granted green cards from certain respective countries. In other words, they're going to reassess LPRs that they've already authorized. You want to talk about the Department of Government efficiency? Doesn't seem very efficient to me, but there's another inefficiency that's being implied here. One of the great features that America has tried to sell across the country, across the world, including in places that are developing countries, including places that are poor, is predictability and rule of law, especially property rights, okay? That democracy can't flourish, republics can't flourish, and society can't flourish with insecure property rights, because that causes self-dealing, corruption, bribery, self-help, things where the state is limited in its ability to give solutions to their people to actually maximize benefit because property rights aren't really respected or secured. You know, in certain societies, they have squatting laws, like you have no right to your apartment or house if they're there for like a day or two, some squatter or something, because they don't really have robust property. That's at least what was argued by some of the, I don't know what to call them, neoclassical, neoliberal soothsayers, the spreaders of democracy, perhaps, the institutional Bretton Woods type people. You know what I'm talking about? Similar kind of thing with the tariffs and with this green card situation. If you're calling into question all these green cards, there's no predictability. There's no predictability. There's no way to order yourself. Same with the tariffs, right? Like, how do you know you can start a business if all these tariffs can just go back and forth and back and forth? And for green card, you get to this point, you're a lawful permanent resident. And I know, okay, these are the set of things that I have to do to avoid having my LPR status removed, right? But all of a sudden, the administration says, we're going to check all that. So what's it going to do? It's going to depress economic activity. It's going to depress security. It's going to depress people who are perhaps eligible to be here, who are going to be valuable to the society, wanting to stay or wanting to come at all. And it's a waste of resources. It doesn't benefit anything. It is purely emotional. It is totally emotional. An emotional response to appease emotionally compromised children. It doesn't address the underlying issue in any respect. These disgusting fascists want to have a scapegoat, but no one's convinced by it, except people who are already stupid enough to give away their liberties and to think that they're not being scammed when the government changes the culpable party while maintaining incompatible and ultimately futile conspiracy theories that don't make any sense. Trump flies off the handle in a series of Truth Social posts. He says that Tim Walz is, quote, seriously retarded. That loses him, apparently, a Tennessee state senator who is now going to vote against the redistricting plan that they had in Tennessee. Smart move there. But these effort posts it's just, look at how long they are. Who the fuck even wants to read them? The dude's unhinged. He's an aging egomaniac, a decrepit 79-year-old who doesn't give two shits about the American people. But so many members, Indiana, my bad, Indiana. So many Americans. It's so easy to fool them. It is so easy to fool so many Americans. Not all of them, hopefully not the majority, and more people are not being fooled. But they want to be conned. They're marks. So they'll believe anything. I've had people send me like these fucking Facebook tier facts, these charts. Dude, like, holy fuck, our education system has failed so many people. Everyone in my replies. Here's what's not going to stop me, though. The cringe ravings of the current Oval Office occupant and all of his dick sucks on Twitter. Not for 1 second, not for 2 seconds. Fuck these people. Trump wants to say all of Biden's this nonsense auto pen theory that I've debunked a trillion times, and now even the people who promoted it and who cite it, they don't even want to debate me anymore about it because they're scared. They know it's bullshit. They know it's bullshit. They absolutely know it's bullshit. I was thinking about the conversation that Connor had on Wick TV, also with Destiny and with Staxiums, and I forget the last person, Prime. And I've taken a position. I don't think that you should charge people who I don't think committed an insurrection with insurrection under Section 3. This is what I think should happen. I think that Congress, this is, I think, in line with some of what Destiny's vision was. I don't think it's charging with insurrection. I don't think that's right. Or using insurrection framework to apply to people who didn't actually engage in the insurrection, because the insurrection at some point ended. But here is what I think should happen. I thought about it more. And I think that to the extent that this is legally ambiguous, Democrats should follow it. Pass Section 3 implementing legislation in such a way that there's a body actually to enforce it. Enforce it as against Trump. Recharge every motherfucker he pardoned and all of them committing crimes right now who he's certain to pardon. And state that those pardons are ultra-virus acts happening by someone under color of law. He was disqualified after the insurrection occurred, and every action that he took in office ought to be questioned as ultra-virus. That's something I would support. Pass implementing legislation for Section 3 of the 14th Amendment and have all the federal prosecutors recharge all these old cases, declaring his pardons ultra-virus acts under color of law that have no effect. I understand there are doctrines of de facto officer doctrine. I want us to challenge to the full extent those doctrines and whether or not they apply in this context. Implement. I'm going to repeat it again. Step 1. Adhere to the precedent of the Anderson case. Implementing legislation in the Congress, passed by both branches, signed by the president to implement Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Actually do that procedure, apply it to Trump. Get all your prosecutors to re-indict or indict on new bases everyone who he's certain to pardon, all those who are covered by Trump pardons in the second term. And make the argument that those pardons are ultra-virus acts done under color of law that have no legal effect. And work out those, the application of the de facto officer doctrine, etc., in court. That is something I would approve. On to this. We're going to read this Caribbean boat strike situation. And then talk a little bit about everyone who's trying to defend the murder being done in your name, on your behalf, with your money. This story came out shortly after this whole thing about the National Guard shooting. We'll read it. Executive order on first Caribbean boat strike, officials said, kill them all, as 2 men clung to a stricken, burning ship targeted by SEAL Team 6. The Joint Special Operations Commander followed the Defense Secretary's order to leave no survivors. The longer the U.S. surveillance aircraft followed the boat, the more confident intelligence analysts watch from command centers became that the 11 people on board were ferrying drugs. Thank you so much for the follow. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth gave a spoken directive, according to 2 people with direct knowledge of the operation. The order was to kill everybody, one of them said. A missile screamed off the Trinidad coast, striking the vessel and igniting a blaze from bow to stern. For minutes, commanders watched the boat burning on a live drone feed. As the smoke cleared, they got a jolt. 2 survivors were clinging to the smoldering wreck. The Special Operations Commander overseeing the September 2nd attack, the opening salvo in the Trump administration's war, quote-unquote war, this should be scare quotes, war, not a war, on suspected drug traffickers in the Western Hemisphere, ordered a second strike to comply with Hegseth's instruction. 2 people familiar with the matter said the 2 men were blown apart in the water, into dust, into gray matter, as Cam Higbee so eloquently put while he was shedding crocodile tears about the National Guard troops who were shot. Hegseth's order, which has not been previously reported, adds another dimension to the campaign against suspected drug traffickers. Some current and former U.S. officials and law of war experts have said that Pentagon's lethal campaign, which has killed more than 80 people to date. These guys are serial killers. They're murderers. And we'll talk a little bit about the implications here. These are murderers, murdering psychopaths. Is unlawful and may expose those most directly involved to future prosecution. The alleged traffickers pose no imminent threat of attack against the United States and are not, as the Trump administration has tried to argue, in an armed conflict with the U.S., these officials and experts say. Because there is no legitimate war between these 2 sides, killing any one of those in the boat amounts to murder. Absolutely. Even if the U.S. were at war with the traffickers, an order to kill all the boat's occupants if they were no longer able to fight would in essence be an order to show no quarter, which would be a war crime. The report is based on interviews with and accounts from 7 people with knowledge of the September 2nd strike and the overall operation. The spokesman declined to address the question. This narrative is false. These non-denials. And then they released a redacted surveillance drone footage. It doesn't include the subsequent strike. So they're aware, right? They are conscious of what occurred here. And now let's look at the non-denial. Well, first off, look at this. We've only just begun to kill narco-terrorists. He should be rotting in prison for murder. We have a decrepit drunk in charge of the military in his little outfits ordering what amounts to war crimes, or at least they would be war crimes if there was a war. There is no war. You can't just call societal ills a war and thereby use the powers of war in response to your creative use of language. It is Orwellian how they've shaped the stupid, naive mind of their MAGA sycophant listener to just accept all of the desecration of the English language which is occurring by the administration. Up is down, down is up, everything is reverse. They just morph and disfigure the English language to make words mean completely different things. Drug trafficking is not armed conflict. It is not a state of war. Never has been. If it were, I suppose you could, drone strike Americans in America engaging in drug trade without any quarter whatsoever? If that's the line, you understand that, right? Like in the American Civil War context, people domestically engaged in a war, the president as commander-in-chief ordered them killed, shot and killed. So using this legal framework, I don't understand what, if you were to accept this preposterous line, it would make no difference if they're outside of the country. If you consider the drug situation to be the fentanyl crisis, to be a state of war, what difference does it make if you're outside of the country or inside the country? By that logic, you could drone strike anyone in America who you deem privately without any public anything or any expectation that this form of evidence is going to be revealed in any public way, but on the pure discretion of the president and his cronies, his criminal, murderous underlings, to kill within the United States. That is the necessary logic of what these psychos are arguing for. These psycho killers. Qu'est-ce que c'est? Right? If there's a war, does the war stop at the border? I'm sorry. So only the drug trafficking is the war, right? It makes no sense. And their MAGA base will accept anything. They're so fucking vicious and stupid. Those who are, or ignorant, listening to these propagandist shills. And I have no problem saying that, by the way. I wish it were otherwise. I'm just telling you reality. They will buy, hook, line, and sinker, what these delusional propagandists are saying. So what does this drunk idiot, what does he say in response to this bombshell? Because now, take this. Even assume, right, that we were in a state of war. The entailments I just talked about domestic use of the military, put to the side the Trump versus United States case, which we warned you about, motherfuckers. We were the ones, not the Ryan Mullally's. Who was right? Who was right this entire time about what this would encourage the administration to do? Who was right? Was it fucking Roberts? Was it Roberts saying, we think it's much more likely that this would have an undue chilling effect on our president? Or was it Sotomayor in dissent saying, this will encourage lawlessness and an unhinged president and all sorts of horrible possibilities? Who do you trust more on that? Roberts and the liars on the Supreme Court who formed the majority in that opinion? Who invented these judicial doctrines, and the downplayers like Ryan Mullally and, yes, Counterpoints and others who said, oh, don't be crazy. They'll never do anything like that. Who do you trust more? Who's turned out to be more right? But put that aside, even assume that there were a war. Even assume that there were a war that were happening with these drug traffickers, and that it were legitimate under the rules of the United States, the laws of the United States, and the laws of international war. These strikes would still be unacceptable. Still. Why? Because it's a second strike. You're not allowed to kill people who are not a threat and engaging in the war in the middle of the time? You're not allowed to do that if they pose no threat. Or not active combatants. There are cases of these being prosecuted, even in Nuremberg. They're war crimes. And let's see the response from this drunk. As usual, the fake news is delivering more fabricated, inflammatory, and derogatory reporting to discredit our incredible warriors fighting to protect the homeland. So instantly, as they always do, using the military as a shield to say, why are you insulting our troops? This is no different than what Bush did. This is no different. It's the same tactics. This guy was a stooge and a paid shill for the Iraq war. That's how we started. Do you guys forget how Hegseth made a name for himself? By running organizations trying to sell the war to the American people. And what did you hear in those days? Any criticism of the war effort? Oh, you're saying that American troops are involved in atrocities abroad? What, do you hate the troops? That's their immediate response. These people, I can't believe, right? Like, so we're criticizing the generals in command and yes, the execution of these illegal strikes. And the response, as they always do, as these tyrannical warmongering thugs always do, what do? They say, you're attacking our troops. Same thing when Mark Kelly did the statement on don't follow legal orders. Why are you trying to kill our troops by saying they have the right to not follow illegal orders? Why are you attacking them? No, we're attacking you, bitch. You drunk? Stop drinking whiskey so much, dude. Retire if you have anything left in your moral compass. And so the first sentence is to use the military as a shield to deflect political criticism. As we've said from the beginning in every statement, these highly effective strikes are specifically intended to be lethal kinetic strikes. The declared intent is to stop lethal drugs, destroy narco boats, and kill them who are poisoning the American people. Every trafficker we kill is affiliated with a designated terrorist organization. Of course, they've designated Antifa as a foreign terrorist organization. This is part of foreign means domestic. Domestic means foreign. War means drug trade. Words mean anything to these people, right? So their designation, so far as foreign terrorist organizations is concerned, or designated terrorist organization, meaningless, bubkiss. Then go classic. The Biden administration preferred the kid gloves approach, allowing millions of people, including dangerous cartels and unvetted Afghans, to flood our communities with drugs and violence. Again, unvetted Afghans trying to have linkage of the issues. You guys granted this guy asylum, and so he's trying now to use the death of a National Guard member who didn't even want to be deployed there because she thought it was pointless. According to CNN reporting, if that's to be believed, put that out there. But he is using the death of that soldier and the attack of the other person as a shield against his murderous rage, against his murders, right? So the murder of a National Guard member, he is trying to link that issue to defend his murders, right? What's the issue? What's the linkage between unvetted Afghans and what you're doing on the high seas? Just watch. These guys' approval rating is so low, they're trying to have any positive news coverage. And inevitably, what always happens, hell, what Bill Clinton did even, which is to his great shame, is to lash out in foreign affairs. Keep an eye on Venezuela. Keep an eye on Mexico. These guys have the capacity to go do a drone strike in Mexico. Trump admin has sealed the border and gone on offense against narco-terrorists. Biden coddled terrorists. We kill them. Our current operations in Caribbean are lawful under both U.S. and international law, with all actions in compliance with law. This is a nothing statement, basically a conclusory statement saying that we are doing everything legally, but not offering any substantive analysis. This guy doesn't deny what occurred. In other words, he does not deny this report. He does not deny the facts here. And what you're going to get, I promise you, if these coward conservative MAGA influencers ever deign themselves to have a debate with someone who isn't a first-year undergrad, to debate someone who isn't ambushed, is they'll say, so what? So what that he ordered a double tap strike to specifically kill these individuals, even after they were no longer a threat? So what? So what that he gave a no court? Because they have no values. They don't care. They're power worshippers, government bootlicking shills. They'll believe and defend anything the government does. They're addicted to and they love power. They worship power. And so they don't care. Step on them as much as you want if you're the government. They will walk through nails to worship at the feet of government. And that's my rant for the day. How you guys doing? Happy Thanksgiving! Hope you guys enjoyed your time that you spent with your families and friends, I hope. But even if you didn't, that's okay. You didn't want to do anything, or you don't have a family, or you don't have any friends, I still value and respect you. If there are Trump supporters who want to come in disagreements, those are the only people I'm interested in at the moment. I don't really care about people who are coming from a different perspective at the moment. We can do that like tomorrow or something if you really want to. But only Trump supporting or people who defend the strikes or who defend the position on the Afghan national who shot a bunch of people up. Gobble gobble. I know we need something to talk about. I'm trying to bait Drew. Let's look at Drew Pavlo. Sorry, I forgot. Last thing. So Drew is defending these strikes and shit, and Will Stansel's going after him and all that shit, and he goes, this is so Will makes the point of isn't this what you hate about China? You're supposed to be the biggest anti-China person there's ever been. And he goes, yeah, my problem with China isn't that they're killing drug traffickers. It's that they're a Marxist-Leninist dictatorship. And the dude is because it's all current thing. It's all the last documentary he watched, right? Right? He cries for the Uyghurs with good, obviously you should. We don't like the way that, we don't support China, the CCP. I mean the government of China. We don't support that regime. We don't support what they're doing. We don't support Marxist-Leninist dictatorship. And so Drew says, it's not that they're harsh on drug traffickers. It's that their government is a Marxist-Leninist dictatorship. And he doesn't even consider, because he's all optics pilled, and this is all for clout, for money. 2 seconds ago, he was he just got refollowed by Elon Musk or something. This is after I got him to talk shit about Elon, and he said I was right on Elon. So he came on my stream, Drew did, to talk about how I was right that Elon is a dog. Elon sucks. And Elon follows him. He's like, yay, yippee, Elon followed me again, or something. So he's an absolute power worshiper. But I'm humoring him, right? So he doesn't even ask himself the question, well, why is Marxist-Leninist dictatorship bad? Why is it bad? Right? Why are you against it? And someone doesn't understand it's a rhetorical question and kind of thinks that I'm standing in the CCP. And he goes, you like voting, right? And being free to speak your mind. Yeah, I do. I also love due process and rule of law and separation of powers by which those freedoms are protected. Excellent. What about a system where abuse of power can't be investigated, exposed perpetrators? That can't happen in China. I totally agree with that. These things are largely impossible. That's why it's really important to prevent low IQ people like Drew from convincing us to abandon the systems that prevent us from turning into China, like Trump is trying to do. Do you understand that? Do you understand what I'm saying? Freedoms are nothing if they're just written down, right? What good is the Second Amendment or the First Amendment. I was trying to make this point to Connor as well. Or the Fourth Amendment, if you just have a government that ignores them and can't be held to follow them. I said this before to Connor, I'll say it again. The Bill of Rights was an afterthought. The Bill of Rights was an afterthought. It's very important. I respect our rights and freedoms. What is more important than our freedoms is the structure that actually protects the freedoms. Because the fact that they're written down doesn't matter as much as the fact that there actually exists a separation of powers, an independent judiciary that is able to hold the government to account, a rule of law that ought be followed by checks and balances. That's what actually protects it. We might need to actually rewatch that Scalia clip. I might actually do it for your own edification if you haven't seen it already. I'm sure many of you have seen it 1,000 times, but it really is the most important point to take away from this exchange. In that, if you don't respect the rule of law, one, you're not even respecting the will of the American people, because the rule of law, these are duly enacted laws that we passed according to our system. And so by ignoring the law, you are making a mockery of our system. But then separately, if you don't have the ability to hold your government to account, the freedoms are meaningless, and you're just going to become China. You're going to become China. Okay, here we go. I'm going to show it to you. I'm going to show it to you. It really is important.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm happy to be back in front of the Judiciary Committee where I started this pilgrimage. I am going to get even more fundamental than my good friend and colleague. Like him, I speak to students, especially law students, but also college students and even high school students, quite frequently about the Constitution, because I feel that we're not teaching it very well. I speak to law students from the best law schools, people presumably especially interested in the law, and I ask them, how many of you have read the Federalist Papers? And well, a lot of hands will go out. No, not just number 48 and the big ones. How many of you have read the Federalist Papers, cover to cover? Never more than about 5%. And that is very sad. I mean, especially if you're interested in the Constitution. Here's a document that says what the framers of it thought they were doing. It's such a profound exposition of political science that it is studied in political science courses in Europe. And yet we have raised a generation of Americans who are not familiar with it. So when I speak to these groups, the first point I make, and I think it's even a little more fundamental than the one that Stephen has just put forward.
It's Breyer.
I ask them, what do you think is the reason that America is such a free country? What is it in our Constitution that makes us what we are? And I guarantee you that the response I will get, and you will get this from almost any American, including the woman that he was talking to at the supermarket, the answer would be freedom of speech, freedom of the press, no unreasonable searches and seizures, no quartering of troops in hope, those marvelous provisions of the Bill of Rights. But then I tell them, if you think that a Bill of Rights is what sets us apart, you're crazy. Every banana republic in the world has a Bill of Rights. Every president for life has a Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights of the former evil empire, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, was much better than ours. I mean it literally. It was much better. We guarantee freedom of speech and of the press. Big deal. They guaranteed freedom of the speech, of the press, of street demonstrations and protests, and anyone who is caught trying to suppress criticism of the government will be called to account. Whoa, that is wonderful stuff. Of course, just words on paper. What our framers would have called a parchment guarantee. And the reason is that the real constitution of the Soviet Union, you think of the word constitution, it doesn't mean a bill, it means structure. Say a person has a sound constitution, has a sound structure. The real constitution of the Soviet Union, which is what our framers debated that whole summer in Philadelphia in 1787. They didn't talk about the Bill of Rights. That was an afterthought, wasn't it? That constitution of the Soviet Union did not prevent the centralization of power in one person or in one party. And when that happens, the game is over. The Bill of Rights is just what our framers would call a parchment guarantee. So the real key to the distinctiveness of America is the structure of our government. One part of it, of course, is the independence of the judiciary. But there's a lot more. There are very few countries in the world, for example, that have a bicameral legislature. Oh, England has a House of Lords for the time being, but the House of Lords has no substantial power. They can just make the Commons pass a bill a second time. France has a Senate, it's honorific. Italy has a Senate, it's honorific. Very few countries have two separate bodies in the legislature equally powerful. That's a lot of trouble, as you gentlemen doubtless know, to get the same language through two different bodies elected in a different fashion. Very few countries in the world have a separately elected chief executive. Sometimes I go to Europe to talk about separation of powers. And when I get there, I find that all I'm talking about is independence of the judiciary. Because the Europeans don't even try to divide the two political powers, the two political branches, the legislature and the chief executive. In all of the parliamentary countries, the chief executive is the creature of the legislature. There's never any disagreement between them and the prime minister, as there is sometimes between you and the president. When there's a disagreement, they just kick him out. They have a no confidence vote, a new election, and they get a prime minister who agrees with the legislature. And, you know, the Europeans look at this system and they say, well, it passes one house, it doesn't pass the other house. Sometimes the other house is in the control of a different party. It passes both, and then this president who has a veto power vetoes it, and they look at this and they say, it is gridlock. And I hear Americans saying this nowadays, and there's a lot of it going around. They talk about a dysfunctional government because there's disagreement, and the framers would have said, yes, that's exactly the way we set it up. We wanted this to be power contradicting power, because the main ill that beset us, as Hamilton said in the Federalist, when he talked about a separate Senate, he said, yes, it seems inconvenient, but inasmuch as the main ill that besets us is an excess of legislation, it won't be so bad. This is 1787. He didn't know what an excess of legislation was. So unless Americans can appreciate that and learn to love the separation of powers, which means learning to love the gridlock, which the framers believed would be the main protection of minorities, the main protection. If a bill is about to pass that really comes down hard on some minority, they think it's terribly unfair. It doesn't take much to throw a monkey wrench into this complex system. So Americans should appreciate that, and they should learn to love the gridlock.
So that, I think, is a much more, I don't know how to say it, like a better, more complete understanding of what guarantees freedom in these respective systems. You know, you can say all you want about the Marxist-Leninist dictatorship and its imposition on individual liberties. and how it prevents people from holding the government to account. It doesn't actually guarantee liberty for its people, etc. And I would agree with that. Fuck the system. Fuck the tankies. All right? I'm not tanky. Never will be standing for one of these countries. But what sets us apart in this country is precisely what they don't have, which is the centralization of government authority. That's why these issues, I saw Pencilvester in the chat, my favorite MAGA Rube, MAGA Mark, really dumb guy, talk about Kilmar. Well, why is Kilmar so important? Why are these individual cases so important? Because they're examples of the centralization of executive authority, ignoring the law, rule of law, statutes on withholding, for example, ignoring court orders, trying to claim areas of where no law can touch them in the foreign context. It matters more, right? I'm more concerned with these questions of following the law, the procedure, the Comey case. Even I'm gonna stress this to you guys, like the Comey stuff and the issues related to these different immigration policies. The reason why I spend so much time on it is because I think that they're more fundamental than some of the policy disputes that we're talking about. I think it's more important than like the big beautiful bill, because it is the only thing that's like keeping us going and like keeping this game going, which this country has produced. We have historic riches, historic power over the last 100 years. Strongest, most prosperous country in the history of the earth. For now. But what keeps our society going is rule of law, is structure, separation of powers. And right now we've been having to rely a lot on federalism. This is a fault of mine, I used to be a lot more cynical about the state governments and having this federal system. I used to be a lot more in favor of more unitary government. But the Trump administration's totally disabused me of that, feeling that we would get efficiency gains and it would outweigh the risk. I am very conscious of and pricing in the risk of the collapse of our system. And so when someone like, who will now show you, Drew Pavlou, he lives in Australia where they don't have as much first of all, they don't have the same like rights as we do. But I'm not trying. I think Australia is a great country. I'm not trying to say that. But it's a different kind of setup in terms of their structure. It's a parliamentary system. Although there are analogies to the American system, he just doesn't get what makes us different and what protects our society. And so for him, it doesn't matter. Oh, you're just killing people who like. Why are you defending drug traffickers? That's his like analysis for it. It's frankly, I have to say, not too dissimilar, in my opinion, from some people who are criticizing my take on like the Hassan detention. I know it's going to get a lot of people's Jimmy's Russells. I stand by it 100%. I think it's completely accurate, everything I said. And I haven't made that video yet, though. I have to finish recording it. About why even though I've said enough about why I'm correct, but putting everything together why I'm correct. They're like, why are you defending Hassan? It's no different. Like, why are you defending drug traffickers when they talked about Kilmar? Why are you defending I don't know, the allegations of the domestic stuff? Why are you defending a wife? Like, because they don't get it. They only think on that first level if they're being genuine, but oftentimes they're just being demagogues to try to pretend that what you care about are protecting bad people. I care about protecting the country for my own sake, for our neighbor's sake, because I don't want them to be denied due process. It's like so obvious, right? The first thing that's going to happen if you make a giant hole in due process, for example, or you make a giant exception to executive overreach is they're going to funnel everything through that exception. Hence what they're doing with the National Guard deployment. They find some hook to try to have an exception to the rule of law where there is no judicial review, where there is no oversight, and they put everything through it, no matter how bizarre an interpretation of that exception is. It's also one of the reasons why I think a lot of the support this is going to sound a little particular. So, two groups of people. Jewish supporters of Trump and Hispanic supporters of Trump. Rule of law, due process are obviously great protections, separation of powers for minority groups, of particularly hated groups. So I think it is incredibly risky for a group like Jewish Americans to support the current president who's trying to make roads through due process and roads through separation of powers. Similar thing with Hispanic Americans. In short-sighted policy, for short-sighted policy reasons. Because once they do that, look at what's coming up from behind Trump. It's Fuentes. It's the Groypers. And once you've destroyed these institutional, these structural, these constitutional systems that protect minorities, that really protect minorities, the next guy, the Fuenteses, the Groypers, who actually want to deport you guys to Israel, if you're a Jewish American, or want to enact, miscegenation laws or something like that, you're going to have no one to appeal to. You're going to have nothing to protect you. It's so short-sighted. This is not an old idea either. Like, what's the whole, first they came for the trade unionists, we'll do the whole meme. I think it might be first they came for the communists. First they came for the communists and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came out for the trade unionists and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me and there was no one left to speak out for me. Obvious. This is not an old idea. You can say that this is all done to protect criminals and all done to protect drug traffickers and all done to protect, it's to protect all of us. And if you're one of these groups, these minorities which are hated by certain classes that are growing in political prominence, you have to be incredibly careful. Because once these structures are eliminated because of the Faustian deal that some of you have made, those holes will remain. There'll be a new guy in charge, and that guy is not going to be so nice to you because you haven't made your deal with him. You made the deal with the previous guy, not with this guy. And they're going to do stuff to you. Things are going to happen to you. And there's going to be no one to protect you. Hence why I speak out for the First Amendment rights of everybody. Hence why I protect, even if it is the case that every one of these 80 people were drug traffickers. I don't give a shit. I'll defend their rights too. Because I'm not really caring about them. I'm caring about myself and my family, my friends and my neighbors and my community and the country. That's what I care about. That's why you give a trial to a murderer. You don't just fucking shoot him. You do it because once you start to say exceptions, oh, this guy doesn't get a trial. Oh, the president can do this. He can ignore the law, but only with respect to this underclass that we don't care about or these criminals. Once you let that sit and simmer, they're going to put everyone in that hole. And you're going to create a beast that you can't control anymore. Even if the people who do the initial cutting and a little bit of slicing, those people, maybe they had the best intentions. Now, in this case, they obviously don't. They're obviously malicious. They're corrupt as fuck. But even if you were to say these people don't mean me any harm right now, you can only speak so far as the current moment is. You can't speak on a longer time horizon than that. because they will change. They will change. And then no one will be left to cry. I saw some shit of like some blackpilling. Guys, don't be blackpilled. That's what they want. If you get blackpilled, then they already won. Don't forget, they're lashing out because they're weak. They're weak politically. But if you get blackpilled and say, oh, it doesn't matter, and you disengage, they win. That's what they're trying to do. So you got to be extra, extra, extra on it now. Smell the blood in the water. Metaphoric blood. And peacefully, patriotically, continue to engage in the info war. Again, this is just speech, what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about anything else. I would never condone that. And I will disavow you if you are one of these people who feels that who are like blackpilled and think that this is it's not gonna help, it's gonna hurt. So we're against violence. We're against it. We want it to be done peacefully, but don't get blackpilled. That's the most important part. Don't get blackpilled. Keep the faith, as a former president would say. If you think you lost, you already lost. Hell yeah. And like the stream and follow the channels. Follow me on YouTube, please. When you do that, it's patriotic to do. I don't see any conservatives in the Discord. So seeing none, I think we may need to potentially call it. Unless people have questions, thoughts, concerns. What are you guys doing? You playing some games? Some deals? Some Steam deals? I can see Twitch chat. I'll try to figure out how to do the Twitter space thing. It always fucks up like my audio inputs, and then it takes forever. So I need to figure out how to do that. Cannot wait for the day we prosecute Hexeth. Why don't you ever respond to chat? I do respond to chats. When I'm doing my monologue, sometimes I don't. A disagreement. If you still disagree with the no, I don't want to do that right now, but we can do that later. Just not today. Just not today. We had a big thing on that. Not gonna lie, Steam queued up. We need to discuss the Witkoff leak call. Oh, the Russia stuff? Yeah, we can do that at some point. I mentioned it briefly, but I think at some point, but that's another scandal. But not surprising, not surprising. You think it's treason? Maybe, yeah. Giving aid or comfort to the enemies. The thing is, though, like, there is a kind of uncertainty now in that is Witkoff, like, imagine this were an insider trying to do that about Ukraine. I think it has to do with your prior about who the administration considers their ally, but or who the country's ally is now. But unfortunately, Trump has made that like we're not in a state of war or hostilities with Russia, and like Trump is trying to like ally with Russia, it seems, and give Russia whatever they want. So does that mean is like who decides who the enemy is? That's an issue, right? Because if this were like Ukraine or Britain or something, I don't know that you would consider it treason if you think it's in the best interest, right, like of the country. Now, if it's done out of allegiance to Russia because of interest in Russia, I could see it maybe, but we'll have to think about it conceptually. Because that's there are two forms of treason in the United States. One is levying war, and the other is giving aid or comfort to the enemies. So it wouldn't be levying war; it would be giving aid or comfort to the enemies. So yeah. You think that USA is one of the worst designed governments of all time? Okay. It's the longest standing. Type of government, right? or at least constitutional. It's like an enforced isn't it the longest lasting current enforced constitution? We've had the greatest and most powerful like country now, right? Like we're, I don't know if we're the greatest right now, but like, in the last 50 years, we're certainly the most powerful, most prosperous. If you consider the Civil War a continuation, I do consider the Civil War a continuation. Why wouldn't you? Did the Constitution stop being in force? In certain states, there was like a rebellion for sure, but like, I don't know why that would stand to reason that like the Constitution wasn't in force. Due to rampant exploitation and advantageous post World War II global positioning. Call it what you want, but the system has stood and it's improved, and I don't know. There's a lot of examples of parliamentary systems that suck too. At that point, it seems like Trump is intentionally damaging our reputation, right? But like the thing is, he has the support of the Congress in what he's doing. Really, maybe like they have misgivings privately, but you know, like in what sense is if it's the democratic will of the people to adhere to the Russians, who's to say that the Russians are the enemy? And if Witkoff is acting as an agent of Russia and betraying the United States, that is different, right? Like if he is really, what he's doing is in service of Russia, I could see it. But even then, I almost think that I don't know that he's necessarily giving aid or comfort to enemies, right? That's another key component, not just the betrayal, but also that it be the enemy. Now, I consider Russia an enemy, but that's, I don't know if I'm like the objective measure of the United States. The only thing is, like, I think I would want an analysis. Wall Street Journal, a European intelligence agency shared intelligence with other European states on details of commercial and economic plans that the Trump administration was secretly pursuing with Russia. That is not surprising to me. I have commented on denaturalization, reverse migration, not on the post element to it, but yeah, I mean, it's silly. I don't think that he's very likely to succeed on it. The founding fathers were shit. Some drunk 20-year-olds who came up with an ass system that has failed at everything but rampant racism. And no, see, I don't take the criticism seriously when you like have things that are just not true. America has not just failed at everything but rampant racism and imperialism. So you kind of lose me when your statement can like that. It's just objectively not true. Okay, that's all I got for you guys. We don't have any disagreeers in VC. Mandela, if you want to talk about it, you can jump on the VC at some point. But it's a little grating to have these like. I get over it a little bit. I humor it sometimes with Pencil Vester and only pencil on these MAGA people, but it does get boring after a while because you can't really like force people to answer questions, and they just kind of just talk, say whatever they want to say. Which is also why like the Twitter stuff gets. I'll go in periods where I'll go back and forth, but it's just annoying not to get closure on different points. But yeah, do VC sometimes. But welcome and please follow the stream and like everything. More stuff to come. I'll probably go live tomorrow, for a bit. Some legal stuff. Oh yeah, I wanted to show you guys. There's a Kilmar thing that I wanted to show you guys as well. I'll do that tomorrow. I love you all very much. We have a community of great, great patriots who I respect deeply. I'm now going to raid relevant. I think that's how you spell it. If not, yeah. Hopefully it'll work. Please like the stream and stay cool. Love you guys. Stay peaceful. I'm serious. Don't fuck around.